Final Fantasy XVI producer Naoki Yoshida recently did a media circuit with a bunch of media companies, and now we have a ton of new information about the game to break into. And there's a ton of good summaries of this information up on Reddit, but if you prefer to listen or watch your news, then you've come to the right place. Today we're going to specifically talk about the interview that Yoshida did with IGN's Kat Bailey, where he spoke about the party system in Final Fantasy XVI, among other topics. Regarding party members, it looks like we're going to be getting a system similar to Final Fantasy XV, where AI are going to control the people journeying with us. However, I don't think it's going to be quite as fixed as Final Fantasy XV is, based on what Yoshida had to say. I think we're going to have a lot of different characters joining us along the way. There's going to be times also where Clive is solo, but overall, I think this is welcome news. And just to clarify, Clive is going to be the only controllable character. However, we might see in the future, maybe they'll add something via DLC. Looking at the quote specifically from the IGN article, Yoshida said, "We didn't want to overwhelm users in our newest trailer, so we focused solely on Clive's battles. That said, for most of his journey, Clive will be accompanied by one or more companions. These companions will participate in battle as well as trade banter with Clive. That said, the party members will be AI driven so as to allow players to focus solely on controlling Clive." Now, this is what most people were expecting from Final Fantasy XVI. I'm personally okay with just controlling Clive if the combat system is as fun as it looks. Yoshida also referenced the Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat system while talking about how Final Fantasy XVI is going to be very different. The Final Fantasy VII Remake would not exist without the original Final Fantasy VII, and those original systems ultimately influenced what the remake became. Final Fantasy XVI, however, is a completely new game with a completely different concept. In order to take the series in a new direction rather than build off of old battle systems, director Hiroshi Takai and battle director Ryota Suzuki made real-time action their focus. Translating traditional summon abilities into player actions and allowing for the real-time swapping and chaining of these abilities in battle has allowed us to create a system that not only looks great, but feels really good to play. Now, if you don't know, Ryota Suzuki worked on Devil May Cry 5, and we're expecting to see a lot of that influence in the combat system of Final Fantasy XVI, for better or for worse. Hiroshi Takai has a long history of working on Final Fantasy games, but is most recently known for being a key part of the team that revitalized Final Fantasy XIV. This system of swapping between different icons and using their skills is honestly a pretty exciting prospect. I like the idea of scaling down traditional attacks from icons from Final Fantasy history and just using those in everyday combat with Clive. Speaking of these icons that we will be utilizing in battle, Yoshida had the following to say. Icons appear in many different situations and iterations. There is no one design concept that covers them all. Some will face Clive as fierce enemies, some will be friends and come to Clive's aid. There will also be times where the player will have to control an icon in real time, battling other icons. The battle type and scale are somewhat fluid and change seamlessly in real time depending on the battle, keeping things at maximum excitement while maintaining immersion. These varied types of icon-driven action-oriented battles are one of the main selling points of Final Fantasy XVI, and we'll be bringing more of them to you in the coming months about them. Personally, this scares the crap out of me because I really didn't enjoy anything to do with icons in Final Fantasy XV. I just thought that it was really glitchy and weird, and I couldn't get into any of those battles at all, while I did enjoy most of the game overall. Hopefully they're going to be able to implement this in a much more fluid way. I think with the more action-oriented combat, then that's certainly going to be a possibility. Also, just with the higher tech available and the different people working on it, they can make something work. Because at the end of the day, if you are able to make these big icon battles play well, then what's not to love? That's so cool to actually be behind one of these iconic summons from Final Fantasy history. Finally, Yoshida spoke about separating Final Fantasy XVI from his other project, Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XVI is its own entity, separate from Final Fantasy XIV and from the other games in the series, so you won't find as many tributes as you will in Final Fantasy XIV. That doesn't mean there won't be some Easter eggs though. That said, Final Fantasy XVI main focus will be on maintaining that series-wide feel of playing a movie rather than drawing from past titles. Playing a movie sounds cool, but that's kind of what Star Wars games are for. I mean, at the end of the day, if that's the feel they want to achieve, then that probably is going to be pretty cool, because if I think of like a big blockbuster movie, it has a really compelling plot, and being able to play through something like that would be pretty exciting. As for the Easter eggs that he alludes to, the Final Fantasy XIV team is amazing at putting Easter eggs into all of the content, and it's honestly one of my favorite parts about Final Fantasy XIV. So if there are some cool but subtle Easter eggs in Final Fantasy XVI, then sign me up, I'm on board. And that's it for the interview. Let me know what you thought about this type of video. I know it's not a super long video, and thank you so much to IGN for that interview. I'll put the link to it in the description below. Otherwise, let me know what you thought about it, if you had any feelings about the reveal of kind of what the combat system / the party system might look like. I know some people are still apprehensive about the action oriented and the, not controlling party members. I totally get that too as a longtime Final Fantasy fan. I grew up with the games. It's hard to see it going a different direction. I can only hope that we get some other titles that will kind of satisfy that traditional Final Fantasy feel. Also, if you're new to the channel and you want more Final Fantasy XVI content, then let me know in the comments, like the video, I mean you made it this far anyway, and then subscribe to the channel, show your support. It shows me that I should be making more Final Fantasy XVI content, which I want to do because it's really fun and I'm super interested in the game. Otherwise, we'll see you all in the next video.